if you're not mulching your fruit trees, terrible things can happen. Back in 2010, I bought a house in North Central Florida, and I was so excited about having a piece of land that I owned that I went right out and I bought some fruit trees and I put them in the ground, right in the sandy front yard, right in the grass. Knocked some holes in the ground, put the trees in, got them watered, and then they barely grew. They barely grew. They got a little water, they got a little compost, they got a little fertilizer, whatever I had, I threw around them now and again. But they just weren't really growing. And they kind of just sat out there by the driveway for a year or two. The grass grew around them. I would cut the grass with the lawnmower. The grass would grow back, as it always does, and I would cut it with a lawnmower, and these trees were just inching along. Then I got smart, and I got a big load of mulch from the companies that were trimming the power lines in my neighborhood. I said, could you just dump some of that mulch in my yard? So they dumped the mulch in my yard, multiple big dump truck loads, and I put down some cardboard and I mounded up mulch and just let it rot down there. Well, nothing much happened the rest of that year, but the next year, those trees just about doubled in size after having sat there for 2 years. And this is a very important lesson. But there's another lesson that ties into this lesson that I'm gonna lesson you about. This last week we were driving through the Florida Panhandle and we went through an area that had been affected by some terrible storms, tornadoes and high winds, and there were snapped and broken trees all over the place. While there, we stopped by the side of the road because I saw a gigantic oak tree that had been knocked over. And what had happened was, it had blown sideways and the root system had been pulled up out of the ground, at least a piece of it. And it was like a gigantic pancake. That pancake was about 1 foot to maybe 1.5 feet thick. There were not a lot of roots coming out of the bottom of that tree that had been anchoring it into the ground. No, it was a great big disc. I think we often have this idea that you have the ball of branches on the top of the tree, and then if you go beneath the ground, there's another ball of roots that kind of mirrors what's above ground. No, it looks more like this. A ball of branches and leaves on top, the trunk, and then a big flat area of roots. And we could see it super clearly. So when I went and I mulched my trees and covered that area, that was where most of the activity of the roots was happening. And most of that area where the roots were trying to grow was also filled up with grass. And grass roots are very aggressive. There have been studies that show that grass roots grow about twice as fast as tree roots. So if you put a little tree in the ground and you have grass growing around it, that is choking out the nutrients and the water. Imagine when you get a little bit of rain, the grass drinks it up first and that tree just sits there. Imagine you go and throw some compost out there. Well, the grass eats it. I've seen a lot of trees sitting in yards that have been there for multiple years and they haven't gotten very big and they're surrounded by grass. The tree is just suffering when it's surrounded by grass because that big disc of roots is in the exact same hemisphere where you have all of those grass roots. The tree roots and the grass roots are all bound up together and the grass is winning. Now you have two possibilities here. You could just go and chop all that grass out and leave the ground bare. Or you could do what I've seen some people do in these big crop fields. They blast everything with an herbicide to kill the grass off so it doesn't compete with the roots, and then they feed with chemical fertilizers and keep it watered. But we're not gonna do that. It's better to kind of recreate the forest floor where trees like to grow and put down mulch. Think of all the sticks and leaves and everything that fall all through the year onto a forest floor and rot down and feed the trees. That's where the trees want to be. So a good way to make your trees grow faster is to mulch them. And remember, there's this big disc of roots coming out. If you can mulch for a few feet in every direction away from the trunk of a newly planted fruit tree and make sure the grass does not get in there, you're gonna have multiple benefits. One is that this mulch is going to feed the ground over time. As it rots down, it becomes compost. Little insects get in there and they chew it up, and their little droppings are micro-manuring your tree. The fungi move in and it becomes more of a forest ecosystem than a grassland ecosystem. That's going to give your tree an advantage. Another advantage of having mulch over having bare soil is that the mulch keeps the ground cool. Roots will grow up into that mulch and under that mulch and stay cool during the day. If you have baking hot sun in the summer and you have all these little feeder roots that are trying to get to the surface and drink the water that comes down, they'll come up after a rain and they'll start enjoying all that water, and then the sun comes out and it gets up to 95 degrees and the soil itself might be hitting 130 or 140 degrees, just baking hot as it absorbs that solar energy, and the tree roots are getting burned. You don't want that. You want them to be cool and happy, and mulch allows you to do that. It also moderates the water. Instead of having the rain coming down and pounding the ground around here and throwing the sand all over the place or making the clay into a hard slick, it's hitting this mulch. Some of that energy is being deflected and it's leaking through, and it's staying moist underneath for longer. So you can moderate in between the drought and the heavy rains by having a mulch layer. And if you water really well before you put the mulch down, you'll keep that moisture in there, so it's always moist. And it kind of has that benefit of a tree being planted near a stream where they've always got some water underneath there that they could tap into. This mulberry here is basically going to be growing in a big pile of compost. As this rots down, it becomes compost and it breaks down and keeps the ground cool, keeps the tree fed, gives it a place to feed, and the roots will come up into this. I've talked about it before, why I'll put bottoms on compost piles. If a compost pile is anywhere near a tree and it does not have a bottom on it to stop the roots from getting in, the tree roots will fill up the compost pile and eat it. That's how they're designed. So by doing this, we're giving the tree all the advantage over the grass. We're giving it that nice, cool, moist, slow feeding that's going on all through the year, and you're going to have a very happy tree. This is what you want it to look like, and this is what you don't want it to look like. This plum tree is surrounded by a lot of aggressive rhizotomaceous grass here. And so in order to fix this, all we have to do is put down some cardboard, or if we didn't have any cardboard or we didn't want to use it because we were afraid of some toxins in it or something, we could hoe the grass out of this area, give it a good deep mulching around it. And I usually try to keep a little bit of mulch away from the base of the tree just in case it rots, but that doesn't seem to be a problem a lot of the times. People will tell you that. Often the roots just grow out to grow where they want to grow, and they do fine. But cover this area over and go out. You know, take a good pace out from the tree at least. So 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. The more you want that tree to grow out and expand and feed itself, you know, that's better. That's much better. Think of that big disc of roots around that gigantic old oak, and think this little tree, when you put it in a pot, it's starting right here, and it wants to run out and grow and support the top. And if it has to fight all the way, it's going to be a lot slower. It's not going to be as happy. You may even lose the tree. And that is why you mulch your fruit trees heavily. Remember the shape of those roots and where the feeding is taking place, and take advantage of it and grow with nature instead of making her fight, making that poor tree fight for every little bit of nutrients. There are times to plant other plants around your trees. If you want a food forest system, or you put some shrubs here and some ground covers here and everything, that's fine. But grass seems to be the natural enemy of trees, and that's the main one you want to keep away. Sure, you might get a little depression in growth by putting certain things around the base of the tree, but you can always chop and drop it and feed it to the tree. It's just grass and trees, they just don't seem to get along. If you want more easy gardening tips, check out my new book, Minimalist Gardening, which will give you a philosophy of gardening that will help you no matter what you're doing or wherever you are. If you live in Florida, you might check out my book, Create Your Own Florida Food Forest. Great, big, thick, illustrated book with lots of plants and ideas on how to get a food forest system established in zones 8, 9, 10, and 11. Thanks for joining me. Be sure to like and subscribe and all that stuff. And until next time, may your thumbs always be green.